Actually, I think that's a very good story to tell. Was that in Hong Kong? So you met with these a bunch of 7 or 8 years old?
We were talking to them about reading and learning English, and they'd all written letters to me. They'd been reading a book about a postman, and one of them said he wanted to read his letter, and he said, Mr. Patton, why do they call you Fei Pang?
Fat Patton, right?
So I said, well, look at me.
No, you're not. By the European or American standard, you're not. But as compared to Hong Kongese, normal Hong Kongese, maybe.
诸如此类，东西方之间不同的判断标准和文化差异，也许彭定康在担任港督期间已经深有体会。而越是接近香港回归的日期，人们对于他的一言一行自然也就越为关注。这其中，彭定康对于香港新机场建设费用的审批，就曾经引起过轩然大波。而他对立法局一些议席的特殊安排，也令他与北京的关系一度非常紧张。
During the most heated arguments and disputes between you and some other, Beijing officials during the late 90s, you were called by many names, and one of which was the sinner for 1,000 generations. Did that make a little bit awkward for you to meet with Beijing officials again when you became the EU Commissioner for External Affairs?
No, the first time I met a senior Chinese official afterwards in New York at the UN General Assembly, the Ministerial Week, he said to me very courteously, this time we must cooperate. And I said, that's what I'd hoped to do last time. I produced quite early in my time as a commissioner a strategy paper on the relationship between Europe and China, not hiding the problems we had in the relationship, but arguing very strongly that we needed to have a more comprehensive and sophisticated relationship. And I think the Chinese officials responded very well to it. We then produced subsequently another strategy paper, and the Chinese produced their own response to it, which was a very good attempt on both sides to find practical ways in which we could cooperate. So I had a good workmanlike relationship with Chinese officials while I was in Brussels, and as you know, I'm an obsessive on China. I'm incredibly interested in Chinese history and Chinese art and Chinese culture, and therefore it's been a great pleasure for me to be able, while I was a commissioner and subsequently, to visit China fairly frequently.
I read about this story. I think it's so funny. You went to give a speech at the Central Party School in Beijing. What did you talk about?
They asked me to talk about politics in a post-ideological world.
Okay.
So it was rather a challenging subject. But I found it an extremely interesting experience. And the first question was, I'd been arguing that one of the consequences of globalization is to push up standards everywhere, whether you're talking about, and I wondered whether it had been a rather over-intellectual approach to the subject. But then the first question was from a woman who worked for the central bank and was a financial regulator, who asked me a very serious and detailed question about money laundering. So I realized that I'd actually hit the spot.
1999年回到欧洲的彭定康，成为英国派驻欧盟的代表之一，并在2003年成为20位欧盟专员之一，负责对外关系。有趣的是，在这一阶段，彭定康对有关中国问题的态度似乎发生了很大的变化。他尝试着努力推动欧盟解除对华武器禁运，并且解释欧洲不应该将内部经济的问题怪罪于廉价中国商品的进入。这位东西方之间曾经的特殊人物，似乎又在以不同的角色发挥着他的作用。
I think there are issues on which Europe can and must play an important strategic role with China. I think it's extremely important, for example, for us to persuade some on the right wing in American politics that China's economic development isn't a threat. China's success is a huge opportunity for everybody. I feel passionately that what has happened in China in the last couple of decades is fantastically important and valuable for the whole world.
I read this book where you said that, from your opinion, China may have more important impacts on the structure of this world versus Russia, who is basically getting a lot of wealth from the oil and natural resources. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I don't mean to be rude about Russia, but Russia is not a great economic power. Russia's economy is about the same size as the Netherlands. And while Russia today has important energy deposits, oil and particularly gas, which make it a significant player in Europe and elsewhere, it isn't a growing sophisticated economy in the same way that India and China are. What Mr. Putin does, in my judgment, is to play a hand of rather low cards extremely successfully, like a good poker player. And the other people around the table respond to him as though he's got jacks and queens, and he doesn't. Of course, in Europe and in China, we need oil and gas from Russia and from other places. But that's the only thing, really, that the Russians have to sell us. They don't have anything else. So they need security of demand, just as we need greater security of supply. It is, I think, this whole question of energy and commodities, an issue that we have to be very serious in discussing with China and India as they grow in the future.